So the Russians just did it again, and I have no idea why. North of Pokrovsk, for the second time in a week, they launched what appears to be a battalion-sized assault with armored vehicles, resulting in at least 12 of those APCs and tanks being destroyed and around 100 Russian soldiers being killed. I don't know. Seems like it hasn't worked for a long time. It didn't work when they tried this just a couple days ago, but here it is, trying again. Now, we've got a bunch of footage coming out of that sector right now, some from Azov and some from the Ukrainian air assault brigades we're going to run through here. But to give you an idea of what just played out a couple days ago, they say on October 13th in Dobropilya, the enemy made another attempt to conduct mechanized assaults on the positions of the defense forces of Ukraine in the area of responsibility of the 1st Corps of the National Guard, Azov. The enemy, using forces from 3 motorized rifle brigades and 1 Marine brigade with military equipment, conducted offensive actions trying to break through the Ukrainian defense. In total, 17 armored combat vehicles and 1 tank were involved in the offensive. The enemy's tactics remain unchanged. In the first wave of the offensive, motorcyclists advanced, followed by armored vehicles with infantry on board, using electronic warfare systems to suppress the drones of the Ukrainian defenders. The columns intended to deliver infantry to the settlements, who, after landing, were supposed to consolidate and later begin offensive actions to capture the specific settlements. That all failed. It looks like a lot of the vehicles were destroyed. The infantry that did dismount were subsequently hunted down and eliminated by Ukrainian drones, artillery, mortars, etc. They say as a result of the defensive actions, 9 infantry fighting vehicles, 4 armored personnel carriers, 3 tanks, and 3 motorcycles were destroyed. And estimates vary between the different Ukrainian sources providing intel here, saying anywhere from 78 to 100 Russian soldiers were killed in this assault. They say the enemy had no success. The situation remains under control. And we actually got some more details of these Russian offensive operations from a Ukrainian mill blogger called K. Mashevets, where he dials into exactly the tactics being utilized in this sector of the front north of Pokrovsk. He says the situation in the Dobropilya and Pokrovsk sections remains quite difficult. And I do want to stress that. You know, we've seen a couple of these pretty suicidal Russian attacks in recent days, which is new and unique and costly, no doubt, for Russian forces. And we're seeing the Ukrainian defenders able to stop these and inflict pretty heavy losses. I don't want that to overshadow the fact that this is still a very, very deadly sector with a significant number of Russian forces massing and continuing to attack in multiple directions every day. The Pokrovsk area in general is an incredibly deadly sector, not just for the Russians on the attack, but also for the Ukrainians in defense. So I don't want these reports, which are significant, right? A lot of what we're seeing day in and day out are relatively small-scale engagements. It's, drones hunting down Russian attackers by 2s and 3s at a time. And of course, Ukraine is not on the offensive, so they are largely manning defensive positions in Pokrovsk. None of that is really unique day in and day out. These straight-up battalion-sized armored assaults are unique, and they are heavily skewed right now in Ukraine's favor in terms of losses. But again, let's not lose sight of the fact that Pokrovsk is a very deadly, very tenuous sector of the front right now. Mashevets says, quote, "It was quite indicative, not just that during 2 days, October 9th and 10th, there were fairly massive and focused attacks and assaults, up to 5 different attempts, but also how they were conducted." And note, he's referencing the first wave of these battalion-sized assaults back on the 9th and 10th. There has since been another that we just documented through Azov and the air assault brigades. He said at first the enemy, acting in small infantry groups, tried to covertly reach the eastern outskirts of Shkovo, operating through the groves from the side of Poltava and Popov Yar. Alternatively, they managed to get a foothold only for a small assault group east of the road leading to Shkovo. After that, a fairly massive push followed, by current standards, with the forces of several assault companies using not only their standard armored vehicles, but also reinforced by several tanks. The number of armored vehicles involved is estimated differently by various sources, but it clearly amounted to at least 12.5 units. He says, at this moment, the final results for the battle for Vladimovka are unknown. However, it is obvious that at least 1 to 2 enemy battalions involved in this direction, especially in their assault units, suffered quite significant losses. And this is one where always kind of trying to balance this. We've got multiple reports coming from the Ukrainian side, really nothing coming from the Russian side. Generally speaking, I would wait to deliver that information until we had more verification from the Russians. All we really have right now is we do have this map here presented by War Gonzo showing one of the showing the area around Pokrovsk, and we'll zoom in here while we talk through what the Russian side is saying about these battles, because I can't find anything calling out these attacks in a couple days now across any of the major Russian Telegram channels. The Russian Ministry of Defense essentially says attacks happen in this general direction. So normally, with that lack of information from the Russian side, I wouldn't present this as something that happened. However, we've got the footage from the Ukrainians, from multiple different units sharing footage, some of it overlapping in this direction. Seems pretty indicative that, yeah, some sort of big assault did happen, and clearly a lot of those vehicles were destroyed. Now, turning to War Gonzo, zooming in here to the Pokrovsk direction. This is deep state map. Map's kind of bouncing around a little bit here. So this area north of Pokrovsk is where a lot of this fighting is happening right now, specifically Shakov, right here. We'll zoom in and then come back out. So this is where a lot of we just heard the Ukrainian mill blogger Mashevets talk about how he doesn't know the situation for the battle for Volodymyrivka. That's right here. This is where a lot of the attacks recently have been taking place. The one on 9-10 October and the one again on 13 October is focused right in here, trying to get to Shakov. War Gonzo talks, this is like the most detailed assessment I could get from the Russians in the past couple days. He says, in the Pokrovsk direction, fighting is ongoing near Minorod. So down here, the road leading east from Pokrovsk, so advances from the Russians to the west. He says the Russian Ministry of Defense reported the liberation of I'm going to butcher this one, Moskovsky. And that was, if I'm not mistaken, I think it was right in this direction. I had it a second ago. It's a small little village. It's not even a big village by any stretch of the imagination. Anyways, it was a small village in this area that, oh, here we go. Sorry. A little to the southeast of Minorod. So Russia is saying that they have taken this little settlement right here. He says there is progress towards Rodinsky, so further up north. On the Dobropilia salient, so this area sticking out to the north, Russian armed forces are advancing towards Shakov. That is it. That is the extent of the Russian summary of events from this direction. We're just not really getting much at all. Now, I thought it'd be worthwhile running through one of the clips that was put out by Ukraine showing the fighting here north of Pokrovsk. We're going to go with the breakdown here from the Ukrainian Air Assault Brigades. We'll go ahead and play that real quick. And it shows exactly what these guys are up against north of Pokrovsk. So a couple different unique elements here. First off, broad daylight, right? Deciding to go out in the middle of the day down main roads. So, there's definitely a lot more mines off the sides of some of these roads, but as they move down main avenues of approach, it looks like this vehicle was already hit. At first I thought this might be a smoke screen, but then it stopped moving and got hit a couple more times over. Moving down these main roads means that Ukraine only has to watch a couple key areas. Right now, of course, highly visible moving across open fields, but it really restricts any sort of mobility. In this case, Ukraine is able to not just zero in where they're observing with their drones and striking with their drones. That looks like artillery or mortars, given the frequency of the impacts there. But the artillery. So they can zero in artillery and mortars on some of these intersections, on some of these avenues of approach. And there we see some of the Russian soldiers dismounting. That looks like artillery. Big enough boom. And you'll see as these, again, kind of modified turtle tank looking things, here comes a good view of some of them. There we go, going cross terrain. There's an actual tank. And we've seen a lot of these utilized by Russia recently where they're outfitting the tanks to be modified armored personnel carriers. The whole reason for that is so these can move towards the front, drop off troops like we're seeing in some of these clips, but then the tank has enough firepower to actually provide some sort of suppressive fire. At times in other sectors of the front, we've seen them move back and forth to pick up additional, oh, look at the spikes on the top of that one. This is interesting here because you're seeing that it's already been hit. That's going to be important in the next segment of today's video, talking about the use of tanks on the battlefield. So clearly some of the Russian soldiers did get dropped off, but then we're going to see in this clip and others that just, look, Ukraine is watching them approach, right? They watch them dismount, and they're keeping eyes on where they get off these vehicles and where they try to take cover. We saw it a few days ago when a bunch of the right on the top, a bunch of the Ukrainian soldiers, or a bunch of the Russian soldiers tried to take up shelter in basements and in abandoned buildings, and the Ukrainian forces just watched and started hammering them one after the other. I had to cut away there. The last clip of that video is like 30 Russian soldiers dead in a pile trying to cross through towards Ukrainian lines. So That's the footage that we're getting from Ukraine right now. Again, they're watching the Russians come up. They're watching them drop, which is the reason we're not seeing these large-scale assaults and why these stand out in so many different ways. We've seen, these motorcycle assaults, ATV assaults, even dismounted infantry trying to move forward, because look at the footage. It's so much harder to see a guy on a motorcycle than, a BMP or a tank moving down one of these main roads, or even infantry moving on foot along the side. And this is one of the balancing acts that we're kind of seeing how Russia is going about it right now. But do you try to push a large force forward with armor to, they did get some infantry forward. They appear to have all eventually been killed. And you start then with, say, 5, 10, 20, 30 infantry forward and try to take it from there, and you lost a couple tanks in the process? Or do you try to infiltrate 2, 3, 4 infantry at a time and hope that enough of them make it forward to where you've got some group that can carry out some sort of decent-sized attack, and in the process they've only lost motorcycles and ATVs? Maybe then a tank could be used in those follow-up operations. But it's very interesting seeing Russia kind of revert back to tactics that we saw not being very useful over the course of the last couple months. And an interesting assessment here that kind of lines up with this came from Russian mill blogger 2 Majors, arguing how tanks are still relevant on the modern battlefield and exactly how they should be utilized. Now, personal assessment, I don't think tanks are done. I think they still very much have a place on the battlefield. We just have to adapt with how they're utilized. This case, using them as armored personnel carriers charging in daylight into a zone protected by drones, artillery, and ATGMs, probably not going to be the most useful way to utilize that equipment. But 2 Majors says he had some dialogue with frontline tankers on the topic of tank fists and the tactics of using tanks in the modern battlefield. He says if a large number of assets are applied on a front section, a breakthrough is possible. A larger number of assets used competently defeats high training and technological sophistication. So not to ruin this for you, but that's essentially his assessment. If we use tanks correctly and in numbers, we can overwhelm the Ukrainian defenders and actually punch through the lines. There's a lot of ifs in this assessment here, but I still feel like it's worth looking at how he views this. He says, suppose a tank battalion, 31 tanks, advances on a breakthrough front 3 to 4 kilometers wide, resulting in a distance between vehicles of 1 to 150 meters. He says this provides that the vehicles are fully prepared. Each tank has electronic warfare, anti-drone cages, and a mine trawl. In a favorable development of events, drone operators simply physically will not be able to launch such a number of drones into the air to stop the fist. So what he's getting at there is a lot of these tanks, it's not one hit from a drone and it's done. I mean, we're seeing time and time again, even in the videos we just played at the beginning of today, you're seeing those tanks take multiple hits. So it's not uncommon for a Russian tank to take 3, 4, even more FPV drone strikes before it is completely out of the fight. So, if you send 31 tanks forward, let's say you've got 3 drones for each one of those, are there really going to be 100 drones in the air at that sector at a given point? Probably not. It's going to take a while to get all of those drones massed and on target. He says, meanwhile, counter-battery combat and suppression of enemy artillery are underway. Our drone operators conduct reconnaissance and strike individual targets, as well as identify enemy drone launch points and destroy them. Infantry, depending on equipment, moves behind the tanks, providing suppressive fire either on BMPs or on vehicles and motorcycles, and at the designated line transitions to the attack. But for the successful use of this tactical episode, a ratio of forces must be 3 to 1. Along with the choice of place, time, and importantly, weather conditions. If such a ratio is achieved on each front section, success will be obvious. After all, war is not only an art, but also a cold mathematical calculation. So I warned you, there's a lot of ifs here. So if you have all of these vehicles spaced out just right, in the right time, place, and weather locations, and you have a 3 to 1 advantage over the Ukrainian defenders, and if everything goes according to plan, and if Ukraine is not necessarily prepared for this assault, then technically a tank thrust through the Ukrainian lines could be utilized. I mean, technically, yes. Again, I don't think tanks are useless, not by a long shot on the battlefield, but this is a lot of what ifs coming together. He says, we agree with the frontline tankers that a tank fist is possible. At the moment, however, we have fewer forces in the sky than the enemy, not to mention other supply issues. So kind of his summary is, it is possible. We could get to this point. There's a time and a place where it could be utilized, and it actually makes me think of how we might need to counter something like this. Again, we're looking at a singular tank moving across open terrain, getting hammered by Ukrainian drones and saying, tanks are done. There's no place for these in the modern battlefield. But again, What if during an opening assault or something, the United States, our military, was facing, 1, 2, 3, 4 battalions of tanks moving across? We have a lot of ATGMs, we have a lot of air power, but it would take a lot of specific munitions to knock out, say, 100 plus tanks in short order to stop that attack before it actually penetrates, say, a defensive line that the U.S. was defending. So, can Russia right now mass 120 tanks in one location? No. Is that something some militaries around the world could do at some point in the future? Sure, right? So these types of lessons learned, I think, are still relevant, even if it's pretty unlikely that Russia's actually going to go this route anytime soon, especially in this conflict. But that's all we got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.